Hello, everybody. Welcome in to a special edition of the NBA Front Office Show because we have a little bit of breaking news that we need to get into. And in fact, I think this is worth a little intro.
I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story.
Chris Paul has been waived or is being waived by the Phoenix Suns, according to Chris Haynes. This a bit of a surprise. In fact, we heard the opposite. What was it? A few weeks ago? Maybe it was a month ago. I don't know. Time has no meaning anymore in the NBA offseason. But we had heard at some point that the Suns planned on keeping Chris Paul, that they were going to make him their point guard next season. They were looking forward to that. And now here we are waiving CP3. So I guess let's just start with, as we tend to do, the cap. Keith, why are the Suns doing this?
Yeah, so Chris Paul is today on the books for $30.8 million. What will happen is when the Suns waive him, because he's presumably not giving any money back, he will have $15.8 million in dead money on the Suns' books. Now, the Suns can do one of two things. They can either eat that money right now, or they can actually waive and stretch that $15.8 million over 5 years. Now, why it's 5 years is because he actually has another year on his contract. Even though it's non-guaranteed, it still counts. And the stretch provision is 2 times the years left plus a year. So he's got 2 years left on his deal, and then they could add a year. So they could stretch that deal over 5 years, which would only put about $3.16 million in debt. Not about, exactly 3 point. I don't know why I said about. 3.16 million. That was like Jonah Hill's character in Moneyball when he's like, I don't know why I lied to you just now. When he says he did 47 player profiles. I might have watched Moneyball twice in the last week. But anyway, $3.16 million in dead money on the Suns' books over the next 5 seasons.
That's not a big deal.
Yeah, not a big. Yeah, that's a small enough number. You can work around that with relative ease. Or like I said, you can eat it all right now and then go off into whatever you have. Now, where this really matters, why are the Suns doing this? Well, the Suns had little to no flexibility. They were barely under. So with Chris Paul in the fold and keeping campaign, they were, let me go back to my notes here. They were about 5.3 million under the tax apron. So they were just over the tax line, about 5.3 million under the apron, and about 15.8 million under the super tax. So they had wiggle room there, but not a ton, right? They were still going to be a tax team. If they straight waive him, they get to 13.3 million under the tax line. So that's all the way under the tax line fully. If they waive and stretch him, they get to 25.9 million under the tax line, which that more than frees up, the ability to do a sign and trade for somebody if they could get somebody to bite on DeAndre Ayton's contract, or Landry Shamit's. You could definitely use the full mid-level. That's only about 12.2 million. So now my guess is we're going to see them waive and stretch him and take all of that flexibility into this offseason. But here's the thing, Trevor. How many players do you think? I don't know if you saw my tweet.
I did.
How many players do you think they have on their roster right now after taking Chris Paul out of the mix?
6.
Yep.
I happen to be looking at it, so that's I'm cheating. But that's why when we talk about the hard cap being at 169 million, if they were to want to use a mid-level exception or something like that, or take in a player via sign and trade, when you're at 7 players, including Chris Paul, and you're at like 165 million, that makes it really tough to have any flexibility to do anything. And what we saw, the shortcoming of this Suns team, was they had no depth. They had no depth on the roster, so it's hard to build out depth when you're that close to whatever a hard cap would be at. Hell, even if we want to talk about the second tier, the super tax, that would be at 179 million and a half. You're talking about going from 6 players, 7 players on your roster, maybe having to fill in another 7 roster spots with like 14 million to play with, and it's all just going to be veteran minimums. Like what's your team really going to look like? When I look at it that way, this makes all kinds of sense for the Suns to do, just to open up some possibilities, whether it's sign and trade, whether it's using that full mid-level, whether it's the biannual exception, whatever it is they're going to do. I don't think there was a path to them really getting the depth that they needed without doing this.
Yeah. So now your challenge is, right? So you're let's go off the guys they have left. You're set at a forward spot with Kevin Durant. You're set at your other guard your off guard spot with Devin Booker. You're set at your big spot if you keep DeAndre Ayton. Landry Shamet, it's that's fine as a depth player, right? You can play him in the regular season at least 20 minutes a night, but that's four dudes. Like, you've got a ton of guys to figure out. My guess is I wouldn't be shocked now if we see them move on from campaign too, and up the flexibility, or they may say, hey, we can bring him back at 6 million, and just have him, because then at least we've got something at the point guard spot to work with. But yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of spots to fill. You've got, two starting spots to fill now, a point guard and another forward spot. You've got to, and then basically, other than Shamet and maybe Payne, an entire bench that you have to build. And we're talking, like we just said, the mid-level exception, maybe the biannual exception. Might as well use it too. There's nothing keeping you from it. You're going to be super expensive probably a year from now anyway. So that says to me, you're probably looking at a DeAndre Ayton trade. Maybe that's going to be the direction this goes. And it may, rather than bringing in a kind of another big name guy to kind of replace Ayton, this may be one of those where, hey, we break Ayton up into
two or three guys
contract wise to bring in guys, or maybe you'll work out a sign and trade where that's how we fill the point guard spot. And then, I mean, they've played a lot of games in the past, 2 seasons with Bismack Biyombo and Jock Landale, and been fine at the center spot in reality. So maybe that's what they want to do. So it's going to be really, really interesting now to watch this Suns. It was already going to be, because a title contender that needs to fill that many rotation spots. But now it's like, holy cow, like you're really kind of starting with a 2 or 3 man team here, and you got to build everything else out around it.
So new head coach Frank Vogel talked the other day about how important having a rim protector on defense is to him and to his system. So that's what's going to be interesting, because I can't see them just going the Jock Landale and Bismack Biyombo route. I would think somebody else would be their target, but that doesn't mean there's any shortage of options. Like, could this wind up being, who knows, like Atlanta? We said Atlanta's going to make some moves. Could Clint Capella wind up making a move to Phoenix? That's me just throwing a name out there. Like, I think there's going to be plenty of guys for them to go add, but just interesting that may be the path they go down. The other thing that strikes me is I'm looking at Cameron Payne's contract right now, $6.5 million, $2 million is guaranteed. Well, Keith, what jumps out to me immediately there is, if they want to use the biannual exception and they're kind of up against it, let's say they use the mid-level and they still have enough space to use the biannual, is the player they're getting on the biannual exception better than Cameron Payne? If the answer is yes, then you waive Cameron Payne and your net output of money is the exact same, because the biannual exception is going to be right about 4.5 million. So that could be a very easy way to free up enough space to use the biannual, again, if that player they think is better than what Cameron Payne would give them.
Yeah, and where all these things project out at, the biannual, like you said, it's just shy of 4.5 million. It's about 9.1 million over 2 years for the biannual. You're limited to only 2 years with that one. Had they had the tax MLE, which that would have even been in question, considering they were getting kind of close into that super tax line. But that's now limited to a 2-year deal on that tax MLE. That's 2 years, 10.3 million or so with that one. And then the non-taxpayer, which now they're in range to definitely get themselves to, that's a total of a 4-year, $52.5 million deal. So you're talking pretty good money on that MLE now that it's bumped up under the new CBA, that's gone up quite a bit. So now let's talk the other thing that immediately people went to, if you're okay. Everybody said, so Chris Paul's just going to resign there, right? Yeah. Like they're just going to knock the number down and resign. In theory, sure, right? That could definitely be a thing, unless they stretch him. If they stretch him, they can't resign him until the duration of the original contract would be over. So if they stretch him, they cannot resign him. But if they don't stretch him, they could waive him and then just resign him to a lower number. But the reporting from Chris Haynes, who's the one who broke this of Bleacher Report and TNT, I'm just going to read his tweet and then we can talk about it. He says, Phoenix Suns have notified Chris Paul that he will be waived, making the future Hall of Famer one of the top free agents this offseason. All right, we can discuss that part in a couple minutes, because I'm not sure I agree. But then he followed up with Chris Paul plans to play for several more years and is eager to help a team contend for a championship. So to me, that doesn't read like Chris Paul's just getting bounced and resigning and coming right back to the
Doesn't.
Suns. I don't that reads like we're moving on. I really wonder if what happened here was the Suns pitched that idea, and Chris Paul was like, "How about you keep me for 30.8 million, and then we can talk about this whole waive me next year thing,
Yeah.
and we'll see what it looks like." And the Suns are like, "Nah, we don't really want to do that." And that may have been very well what triggered the, "All right, we're moving on and we're going in a different direction."
So when I look at that, I think about the way the tweet is worded, and I know, what we know in terms of how relationships are built and all that kind of stuff. That's where Chris Paul immediately becomes one of the top free agents on the market and all
Yep.
that. That's hey, I'm going to make sure Chris Paul feels good about this
Yep.
report
Yep.
being out there. And I believe I may be wrong on this. So I don't want to put this out there and say I'm 100% correct. But I am pretty sure I recall an episode of Haynes' podcast with Mark Stein where he talked about running something by Chris Paul before reporting it.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah,
and that was like a month or so ago.
Yeah, I think they're fairly well known to be pretty tight.
So that's part of, in terms of when he's saying, announcing that he's one of the top free agents and all that's part of it, right? That's part of that. But this is going to be interesting to see what this does too, because this free agent class is not great. There's not a lot of depth here in this free agent class. Chris Paul's 38 years old, but teams are going to be interested. I think this does shake things up on the market. And right now, teams are probably scrambling and figuring out, does this make sense for us to consider talking to Chris Paul and maybe seeing if he wants to come over?
Yeah, I mean, I jokingly said, Celtics fans have said for like years, like, we need a Chris Paul type, right? Like, and it's like, well, now you could get a Chris Paul type. So this was his last couple years, with the Suns. So this is 2 seasons ago, 21-22. Shot 49% from the field, but only 32% from three. Really a major dip there. But 4.5 rebounds per game, 10.8 assists, which led the league, and 14.7 points per game, and almost 2 steals per game. So pretty good season. This year, 44% from the field, but he took more threes, but he made more of them, 37.5. So that's a pretty respectable number.
Absolutely.
At almost 38%. 4.3 rebounds per game, 8.9 assists per game, which obviously I think fell with just more talent around him, and 14 points per game. So I think, I don't think he was particularly good this past season. And I think he had a really tough playoffs. Like he shot 42% from the field and then 32% from three in the playoffs. And it defensively is not the guy he once was. But if you have another solid lead ball handling option, doesn't necessarily even need to be another great point guard, but just someone else who can run the offense. Like, yeah, 100% you bring him in. Because here you talked about the free agents. Here's my sneak preview. We haven't gotten into the free agent rankings yet, but I only rank 2 players in the all-star tier among free agent point guards. That's Kyrie Irving and Fred VanVleet. And people may say, where's James Harden? I have James Harden as a shooting guard. So then starting level guys, D'Angelo Russell, Patrick Beverley, Russell Westbrook, and then Dennis Schroeder, Gabe Vincent. Those guys are like my top rotation guys, which they could be starting level guys too, right? They're right on the cusp because they, it just kind of depends on the circumstance where they're coming off the bench. So yeah, I mean, he slots in behind Kyrie Irving and Fred VanVleet. Like I would probably have him behind those 2 guys at this point, just given the age, the injury history, and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, that's probably just to give you a measure. Obviously, I have Kyrie as the second best free agent behind James Harden, but I have VanVleet as let's see here. I gotta find him. I have him as my 5th best overall free agent. So, Chris Paul is probably slightly behind. I'd probably have like Brook Lopez, Jeremy Grant, Kristaps Porzingis all ahead of him. But, top, 10, 15 range?
But what's like all the guys you named, I'm imagining are out of reach for teams with the MLE.
Yeah, 100%.
Chris Paul probably is not out of reach
Correct.
with the MLE. And
Yep.
that's the big difference.
That's the difference, right? Is 38 years old. Yeah, he's going to be. Now, here's the thing. I know I threw out there the MLE's 4 years. They won't be able to give him 4 years because of
Correct.
the over 38 rule. So that's going to complicate things. So he's probably only going to get a two-year deal kind of going into this because of the way the guarantees will work and those kind of things. And it'll probably be look weird on that second year. At this point in reality, Chris Paul is probably going to play year to year, would be my guess. Figure it out. I know Chris's report said several more years. All right, we'll see. What is that?
Sure.
Is that 2, 3, 4? Like, well, I don't know where we go with that. But yeah, I mean, super interesting that he comes on the market here. Very, very. I still think very unexpectedly. I certainly had him penciled in as returning to the Suns based off all the reporting we had over the last couple weeks.
So let's by the way, I wanted to throw this in. According to Cleaning the Glass, Chris Paul on offense was in the 60th percentile this past season among point guards and the 52nd percentile on defense among point guards. So solid, right? Just solid.
Right.
Just solid. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so that's what you kind of have to anticipate if you're not getting if we're talking 5 years ago, big difference, right? That's not exactly what Chris Paul is at this point. But let's speculate wildly here. Where do you think he winds up?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I mean, I think, and I'm not just saying this because you're my buddy and we're doing the show together, but I think you got to put the Lakers in the mix, right?
Sure.
It's just been rumored for, every time Chris Paul's been available. So now he's more attainable than he's ever been. Is he that much better than D'Angelo Russell and Dennis Schroeder? Maybe. I don't know. And, we'll see. Are the Lakers even going to be in position to use the full mid-level? Would only part of that be enough? We'll see, ultimately where that one goes, if it's, $5 million, which is the equivalent to the tax MLE, we'll see. But, as I start looking around, teams for next season that don't really have like a good point guard option in place, there's really not all that many, right? It's there just isn't. Most teams have somebody in place that's already a pretty good team, with guys. I kind of could Dallas maybe make sense, kind of
sure,
alleviate the ball handling duties. One that kind of is sneaky to me. What about Memphis, where he covers for Ja while Ja's suspended?
The rumors that are going around right now are that Ja could be out for like 30 games.
Yeah. Why not, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, right.
But then what happens when Ja comes back though? Then it's Ja, Tyus Jones, and Chris Paul.
Well, you probably trade Tyus Jones at that point, right? You probably trade him to get a small forward and fill the Dillon Brooks spot and go. I mean, that gets a little. Now we're chaining multiple moves transactions together, and that gets a little crazy. I'm just scrolling through Chicago.
But this is the conversation we've been having in regards to D'Angelo Russell too. Mm-hmm. If it's not the Lakers, where does he go? What happens with him there? So that's the challenge for free agent point guards right now. Any free agent point guard that we want to look at, it's where do they ultimately land? Yeah, I think Chicago is a good one to bring up, particularly with Lonzo Ball. His career might be over. I hope not, but
sure,
it's possible. But so Chicago, I think, would be a natural landing spot.
I mean, the Clippers, right? If they
go back to the Clippers,
no, it'd have to be for the minimum there, but
right.
Is that enough?
If you're the Clippers, would you rather have Russell Westbrook or Chris Paul?
It's hard, right? I mean, that's actually a real decision because Russ was pretty good for the Clippers.
Yeah.
What about Milwaukee? Right? It'd have to be for the minimum, most likely. Maybe they could, wiggle into the tax MLE. I don't think so, but probably the minimum. But I mean, that's a pretty good chance to win, and he can play with Drew because Drew can slide over and play the two.
Sure.
There,
I feel like Miami comes up with any of these situations, but they're in an interesting cap situation of their own.
Yeah, I mean they're already in a tough spot. You've got Lowry for another year. It sounds like they want to keep Gabe Vincent. I mean, the reality is, right, he's not going to go to it. I'm not trying to be mean, but like Detroit could use him, but he's not probably going to go to the Pistons.
No,
right, they're too far away. I mean, the Spurs, that'd be awesome if he went to the Spurs, but they that's probably just not going to be how that plays out.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just scanning through. Like nobody else is like super jumping out as like we need a point guard. Which maybe that could lead back to the Suns.
Phoenix. Yeah.
Right. I mean, maybe now. My guess is this is more like somebody lines it up to get Chris Paul, and then whether it's their starting point guard or a backup, they work a trade and move somebody. And now it's like, all right, we've got Chris Paul in here, and he comes in, and now we move the other guy to build something else out.
Yeah. That's exactly what could wind up happening. Be that where an opportunity opens up that isn't available right now, because you're right. You look at the landscape, and it's hard to figure out exactly where he goes. Like, would Utah? Would he consider going to a Utah team that showed some promise?
Sure.
But again, that's not. If you're Chris Paul, you want to go someplace you can win a championship, right? And so that's a very
he's got left to accomplish, right?
Right.
Like he's done everything else. So yeah, you're trying to win a title now.
So that's a limited number of teams that are going to be able to offer him that and
Yep.
have a need at point guard. So it's going to be interesting to see where he lands. And again, it could wind up being that he's right back in Phoenix. That could be the path here. But you're right.
Mhm.
The way the tweet was worded didn't sound like that's been like orchestrated already. Like that's already in motion. And as
Yep.
you and I talked before we came on the air, it's not like they have to play coy about this. If that's what the plan is, they can just say this is the plan, right? Like that, this is what we're going to do, unless there's something with he's a free agent and we can't announce it and we can't be talking to a free agent ahead, but he's their own guy, so
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense. There's
No, if that was going to
I'm
be
grasping at straws here.
Yeah, exactly. If that's going to be how it was going to go down, I think we'd already have the reporting on that, right? The Suns' intention is to waive him and resign. I go not the same level of player. Obviously, it didn't happen. It's June 7th, right? So like we're still a month out from free agency really starting in full. But it happened right at the start of free agency. But remember a few years back, the Milwaukee Bucks waived George Hill from his, I think it was fully non-guaranteed. Might have been partial. If it was a small partial, and then re-signed him. But the reporting right away was the Bucks are waiving George Hill and then going to re-sign him to a longer-term contract that gives him more security moving forward. And that's exactly how it played out with that one. So that's one where all right, let's see where we go with this. But I would think we kind of would have already probably had that reporting. Now with Chris Paul too, it is important to note his guarantee date wasn't until June 28th. So we're 3 weeks ahead on this. So this might be the Suns also saying, hey, let's give you a jump, right? Let's let you kind of get out there. Now we still can't talk to anybody yet, but like just if he's not their player anymore, it's far less punishable because you're just tampering with a actual free agent. So.
And teams can start planning too. Like, okay, we know he's a free agent now. We can figure out, do we want to be a team that's in the mix for him? We can plan, our draft plans can change because of this and all sorts of things. So I do think maybe this is, we can say good on the Suns for letting him go this early, but we don't know all the dynamics that are at play here.
And for the Suns, this opens up more time for them too, right? To start doing everything that they got to do now. Because like we said, I mean, a lot of work to be done on that team. I mean, it is awesome that you're starting with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, right? That's amazing. But you got a whole lot of dudes to put in place around those guys to be the kind of team you want to be, moving forward. And that's, that work will, that'll start in earnest here in, over the next 2 weeks leading up to the draft. And then, in the, time leading up to free agency and as free agency starts. So, a lot of stuff coming for Phoenix. I mean, this is like domino one of a whole bunch of dominoes that are going to fall.
Oh boy. Yep, man. I was already pumped for the offseason, Keith, and now only more so. Chris Paul hits free agency. We'll see ultimately where he winds up. But
just glad I didn't finish writing their offseason preview yet.
Oh God,
it's like coming right up. So like it's gonna be like one of my next ones, and I gotta get on it here. And then now I can at least write it with the clarity of all right, Chris Paul's not involved.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm glad you didn't, pump out 2,000 words or something that now it makes no sense. So
exactly.
Lucky break there, but everybody, thank you for coming in and joining this special edition of the NBA Front Office Show. Make sure you do subscribe, turn on those notifications as well. Till next time, everybody. See ya and stay safe.